This is the first of a series of talks on the book of Proverbs. Primarily we're going to be looking at the subject of wisdom throughout Proverbs. Now that book, along with Ecclesiastes and Job, are considered as part of the wisdom section of the Old Testament, and Proverbs contains a lot of advice on how we can live a valuable, a worthwhile and a fruitful life. It's full of warnings to people about the pitfalls that they should avoid, and advising them on the attitudes and on the practices that they should follow. As we read through the book of Proverbs, there's a kind of randomness to a lot of it. Sometimes we get a number of verses dealing with a particular subject. Sometimes it's just an isolated thought, and then the author moves on to consider other areas. But the idea of wisdom flows right through the book of Proverbs. So rather than go through it on a verse by verse basis, what I'd like to do is to pull together all the passages in Proverbs which deal with a particular aspect of wisdom and consider them together. So who are the authors of Proverbs? Well, they come from a variety of writers. 26.5 out of the 31 chapters are written by Solomon or are attributed to him. There are a number of other authors who are named who are not mentioned in the scripture anywhere at all, like King Lemuel. We don't know who he is. So Solomon, though, wrote the vast majority of the Proverbs, and he's supposed to be the wisest man who ever lived, and therefore it's appropriate that we should hear what he has to say about wisdom. So who was the book of Proverbs written for? It's written by wise men, but who were the intended readership? A lot of the writings in Proverbs are in the form of advice from a father to a son. The reader is addressed as my son 23 times in the book of Proverbs. And there's a number of places which contrast a wise son with a foolish son. And although a lot of the advice that's written is appropriate to any young person, warnings against adultery or excessive drinking, getting into bad company and things like that, it's obviously being written to someone who is quite high ranking. For example, it deals with integrity in business dealings. It deals with generosity. There's a great deal written about the merits of a good wife who can manage the estate. The first part of chapter 31 is devoted to providing advice for kings. The poor man is not addressed as such, but the son that the Proverbs are written to is expected to care for the poor. So it's written with someone in mind who is fairly high in rank. So when he talks about wisdom in the book of Proverbs, what exactly do they mean by wisdom? Well, it's not to do with getting theoretical knowledge. It's not academic knowledge. It's not an education he's looking for. What we have in mind here is practical wisdom. Wisdom and knowing how to live. We get words in the first 5 verses of chapter 1 of Proverbs like wisdom, discipline, insight, prudence, knowing what is right, knowing what is just and fair, discretion, guidance, and so on. It's all about practical wisdom and how we should be living our lives. So if we have this kind of wisdom, there are a lot of practical benefits. This wisdom, though, doesn't force itself on anyone. It doesn't force itself. If you disregard it, though, you will suffer the consequences. So in these 31 chapters, the way of wisdom and the way of folly are set out, and although they were written to a totally different culture a long time ago, there is a great deal of timelessness about what is being written. And what we will do is to explore the different aspects of wisdom which are dealt with in the book of Proverbs. How do we build the attitudes and values that are pleasing to the Lord based on this practical wisdom for the 21st century?